And Columbus, when he left, he didn't have any faith. He said, I believe the world is round. I think he was ridiculed because of that, too. You know, whenever you make a change, other people ridicule you. Columbus didn't know. He didn't have any faith. In fact, Charlie and I always suspect that he hired a special sailor. He hired him special. And he put him in the lead ship up in the crow's nest at night. He whispered in his ear. He said, I believe this world is round. He said, but if you see the edge of this damn thing, you holler out, you know. When he left, he didn't leave on faith. The first thing that caused him to make the whole process, and he used the same process, because they really wanted these goods and they was tired of going the old route, they became willing to change. They became willing, and willingness is the foundation. In fact, this willingness was there. The next thing Columbus had to do, he had to believe that the world was round. And this believing don't really do you any good unless that belief turns into something called a decision. Based on what he believed, he made a decision. And he made this decision. He was still standing on the banks deciding to go. But that decision wasn't any good until he put it into action. He went out and he talked he got the money, he supplied the ships, and he set sail across the ocean, took the action. And he sailed and he sailed and sailed. He sailed for 33 days. And finally, on the third day, they hit land. He got results. And he went back after he made the trip, he stayed over where he stayed, he went back and he went back to the queen and he told her, she said, where's the gold you was going to bring me? He said, honey, I didn't find none. He said, yeah. He said, but there's something over there. He said, I'm going to go back on another trip if you refinance me and I'll find the gold. So he took the second trip. And on the second trip, he came back on faith. He knew the world was round. So you can see he went through a simple process, and it's so simple. And this is the way we humans accomplish anything in our lives, through the same simple process. Now, this is the way we fail. You know, if we believe wrong, we decide wrong, we act wrong, and we run into trouble. We get bad results. Or we can succeed with this process. So basically, you know, there's nothing new about this. Is the way that we humans being functioning from the beginning of time. And this is the great simplicity of life in what we do. And our 12 steps are laid out on this same simple process. Step one gives us willingness. Once that we keep on trying to drink and we finally come to the fact that we're powerless over alcohol, and this ain't going to work for us, when we find out that this ain't going to work for us, we become willing to change. As long as we can't give that to nobody. I mean, they have to get their own willingness on an individual basis. Now, once we become willing to change, the next thing is step two. We have to believe we can change. In step three, we make a decision to change. And then we take the actions of 4 through 9. These are the actions that carry out the decision in step 3. Now, after step 9, we get the promises and the results of the promises that come in step 9. And then in step 12, it says, having had, once we have had this happen in our lives, we no longer believe it will work. If this has happened, we know it works. Now, the person who knows is step 12. Once you know, then you can go back and help the next person come to believe. Right? My faith to another person is not faith. I cannot give him my faith. But once that what I know can help him come to believe, I cannot help him become willing. That's step 1 he has to do on his own. But once he becomes willing, then I can enable him to come to believe. He can make a decision. He can take an action. He'll get results. One day he'll know that he can go back and help another alcoholic. So we can see the rhythm of our steps is real simple. There's nothing complicated here. This is the way that we have to believe to do anything. This is the way we get in trouble. This is the way people get in prison, the penitentiary. They believe they can steal and get away with it, right? So they make a decision to steal. They take the actions. The police catch them. They get bad results. Right? See, because why they believe they can steal, the police believe they can catch them. And so what got them in jail? Was it the stealing? No. It was what they believed. That was the beginning of their trouble. Everything we do is born. It's the seeds of our actions. So this is all we have to do here, and everything else is laid out. Well, we have the other steps to decide, the actions. All of it is built the same thing as Columbus used, the same program.
We agnostics, we who believed in God, but acted as if we did not. We were fond of saying, if you could prove God exists, and if you can prove that we could get the power, then certainly we would let God do so. And sometimes, even though things are proven, they're not always right anyhow. And we have a little example at the bottom of page 51 to show those that have been waiting on proof that proof's not always right either. We ask ourselves this: are not some of us just as biased and unreasonable about the realm of the spirit as were the ancients about the realm of the material? Even in the present century, American newspapers were afraid to print an account of the Wright brothers' first successful flight at Kitty Hawk. Had not all efforts at flight failed before? Did not Professor Langley's flying machine go to the bottom of the Potomac River? Was it not true that the best mathematical minds had proved man could never fly? Had not people said God had reserved this privilege to the birds? In the century you and I live in today, in the beginning of this century, the best mathematical minds in the world had proven that we would never be able to build a powered aircraft that would pick itself and the weight of a pilot up off the ground, that it was an impossibility to do so, and they had given up on it. Now here comes two guys along called the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur. They absolutely amazed me. In the beginning they were not mathematicians, surely not aeronautical engineers. They were high school dropouts, and they were both bicycle mechanics. Now, how a high school dropout bicycle mechanic believes that he could build a powered aircraft when everybody else had proven you could not is beyond me to understand. But they believed they could do that. Now, based upon their belief, they made a decision that they were going to build a powered aircraft. Based upon their decision, they took some action. They went in a bicycle shop, they cleared out all the bicycles, they put the tables together, they laid out a piece of paper, and they designed their own aircraft. They said there's no sense in looking at anybody else's because everybody else has failed. We'll design our own. And they built that thing, and they took it out to Kitty Hawk, and they tried to fly it. And sure enough, the first time they tried to fly it, it crashed. And I can just see Orville turn to Wilbur and say, "Damn you, Wilbur, I told you this wasn't going to work all along." But Wilbur said, "Let's take it back to the shop, let's repair it and modify it and try it again." And after some repeated attempts, one day that thing flew. And one of them was sitting in a seat as the pilot. And somebody saw that, and they ran to the telephone, and they said, quick, put it out over the wires of the world. The Wright brothers have successfully flown a powered aircraft at Kitty Hawk today. The newspaper man said, "You crazy." He said, "If I tell that lie, they would fire me tomorrow." In the face of proof to the contrary, the Wright brothers went right ahead and built a powered aircraft. You see, they believed they could. So those of us that have been waiting on proof, proof's not always right anyhow. So then we come along and we say, okay, all right, then if I could understand God, if I could just understand God, then I could use that power. He's got examples in here talking about the understanding. He talks about electricity in this chapter. And you know, today, in our present time today, and as much electricity as we use, and as much work as it does for us, we do not understand electricity. There's not a human being on the face of the earth today that can really explain electricity. Oh, we know that you can take an armature and spin it in the field, and coming out the other end of it's this thing we call electricity, and we know that we could take it and use it, but we do not really understand electricity at all. But that doesn't keep us from using it. You know, I have absolute faith in electricity, and I use electricity in my life every day. And electricity certainly is a power greater than I am. Anything you can understand is a power greater than you are. And if I had to understand electricity, I never would be able to use it. When I turn on that light switch, I expect those lights to go on every time. I'm absolutely amazed when they fail to go on. I think it's the same way about God. If we could understand God, maybe He would be so small we couldn't use Him either. The fact that I don't understand God does not necessarily keep me from using a power greater than I am any more than it keeps me from using electricity. If I know all I got to do is believe, and if I know that the beginning of the finding of that power is through belief, and I got a procedure to follow and I can find that power, then about the only other thing I really need to know is where is that power? And many of us have been confused throughout our entire lifetime as to where we might find that power. I know as a kid growing up, somewhere in my mind, I got it in a picture in my head that God stood up there on a cloud. Tall, elderly gentleman, long flowing white robes, long white hair, halo around his head and sun rays shooting out of it. Now, I don't really know where I got that picture, except maybe every time that I heard the minister talk about God, he always pointed up there. And I assumed that's where he was. But what really confused me is every time he talked to God, he looked down here. No wonder kids get fouled up as we grow up in these present. I looked and I looked and I looked and I looked and I could never find God. And the reason I could never find Him is because I wasn't looking in the right place. My book tells me exactly where He is on page 55. Joe?
Actually, we were fooling ourselves, for deep down every man, woman, and child is the fundamental idea of God. It may be obscured by calamity, by pomp, by worship, of other things, but in some form or other it is there. Our faith in a power greater than ourselves and the miraculous demonstration of that power in human lives are facts as old as man himself. We find this out that faith in some kind of God was part of our makeup, just as much as a feeling we have for our friend. Sometimes we had to search fearlessly, but He was there. He was as much as a fact as we were. We found in the great reality deep down within us, and the last analogy is only there that He may have found it was so with us. So here's why He gives us, God is within each and every individual. Regardless of what we tend to call it or what we want to call it. Some of us might want to call it conscious. Somebody might want to call it the spirit of the universe, our directions. Some might even want to call it the soul. Regardless of what we call it, we all seem to realize, I think each and every individual can simply realize that we all have a sense of right and wrong, a sense of direction in our lives. We might not have been using it constructively, but we have always had that. Every once in a while we all have something to come to us and say, well, and it's like in China, I say, and I know many times in my case, I get ready to do something, and a little voice, not a voice that speaks out, but something inside says, I don't think you ought to do that. And I just go right on and do what I want to do and get in all kind of trouble. Then it seems to come back and say, hey, I told you not to do it. Well, I've always had that. I've never did anything wrong that I didn't know it was wrong. I never did anything wrong by accident. Never had a slip on that. I knew something was there. It was not. It was a conscious thing that always has told me all my life, and that's God. And I've always had that.
If God dwells within each of us, and I certainly believe that He does, I think down in every man, woman, child is this fundamental idea of God. And I think we may have obscured it, pushed it down in our search for money, power, prestige, whatever you want to call it. But every one of us seems to know the difference between right and wrong. We seem to know how we should live and how we shouldn't live. We seem to know what's right and what's wrong and what we should do and what we shouldn't do. Most of us never did pay much attention to that and did our own thing. Now, if it's true that God dwells within all human beings, then what that really means to me today is I've got my own personal God. You see, my great fear when I came to this chapter was that God is hellfire and brimstone, and He was a punishing God. And based on that idea, I'm going to be able to have a vital spiritual experience. This little chapter has not only given me a little procedure to follow in finding God, but this chapter has given me a new understanding of God. And if I can now accept the fact that God dwells within me, then He becomes my own personal God, and I don't have to worry whether He's the God of the Baptist church, the Catholic church, the Hebrew religion, or anybody else's church. Because if He dwells within me, He's my own personal God. Now, based on that idea, I may be able to go on and make a decision which I'm going to be called upon to make before very long. But without this chapter, and with the old ideas about God, there's no way I would be able to make that decision. Thank God Bill recognized that and put this chapter in. One of the finest pieces of spiritual information I've ever read on a very simple basis. Nothing complicated about it at all.